as you say, there has now been a resignation over those fixed penalty notices, but it's not one of the recipients, it's the Justice Minister. Now, it would be wrong to say that Lord Wolfson, David Wolfson, is a household name. He's nothing of the sort. He's a junior minister, but he's a very distinguished barrister. And in his letter, as you were saying just then, he has absolutely gone to the heart of the excuse that a lot of people are making for why there shouldn't be resignations inside that building, which is that there is war in Ukraine. And he says, as you were saying, that you can't actually go around the world defending democratic norms if you're not maintaining resolutely the observance of the law and the rule of law in your own country. It's an absolute sort of exocet aimed at the excuses he maybe sees that other people are putting for not having any resignations. MPs, well, we've only had one of them. One minister resigns, only one MP actually publicly calling for Boris Johnson to go today. Now, that has a lot to do with the date. We're not far off the local elections, but there are a lot more MPs out there who are on the record, online or in quotes to local newspapers, other places, having said pretty hostile or brittle things ahead of these fixed penalty notices about what was going on in Partygate. So they are lurking below the surface when those local elections are out of the way. Tuesday, next week, the Prime Minister will go to the House of Commons, give an account of what happened with his fixed penalty notice, but he'll be aware the way the Met are conducting this inquiry, there is the possibility of more fixed penalty notices. He will not want to be going back to the Commons again and again. He'll be hoping he can frame his words next week in a way that says, well, I've answered all those in the past. It's not clear MPs are going to let him get away with that should he get more fixed penalty notices. Here's how the day went here.
The Prime Minister and the Chancellor observing a COVID memorial silence 2 years ago in the Cabinet Room, scene of the law breaches the Met believes happened last year. For a while yesterday, Rishi Sunak pondered whether he should resign, a move that could have triggered the downfall of his neighbour.
Is it true that the Chancellor was on the brink of resigning?
Well, look, I know the Chancellor and the Prime Minister spoke. They both decided that they would accept full responsibility. They apologised. They've both done that in tandem. So I haven't had any specific conversations with the Chancellor. I can't shed any particular light on this.
That moment of danger has been averted, but the fact that the Metropolitan Police issued fixed penalty notices for the Cabinet Room nibbles to mark the Prime Minister's birthday in June 2020 has panicked many in Downing Street. Several Whitehall sources said it suggests the Met's threshold for what is a breach of the law is actually lower than the civil servant Sue Gray imagined, and could mean dozens more fixed penalty notices are on the way. Tonight, the Justice Minister, Lord Wolfson, has said he thought the scale and nature of the law breaches meant there should have been a stronger official response. As there were no resignations in Downing Street, it seems the Justice Minister decided he should resign from the government. Scottish Tories campaigning for next month's elections. Tory MP Douglas Ross had already pulled back his call for Boris Johnson to go, saying war in Ukraine meant it was the wrong time. Many Tory MPs say, with local elections only 3 weeks away, they don't want to add to divisions right now. The former leader of the Scottish Conservatives wasn't so restrained.
I think that the Prime Minister should walk now because, one, he's been shown to have broken the laws of the land that he himself set, because he presided over a culture in Number 10 where there was persistent law breaking, and because he went and told both the Parliament and the country that no laws had been broken when they clearly had been, and he knew that they had been. So I think he should go now. Whether MPs choose to put their letters into the 1922 committee is a matter and a mechanism that is only open to MPs.
Tory MPs pondering any challenge will be studying the form of leadership contenders. Rishi Sunak's plummeted from runaway favourite in the last 2 weeks. Other candidates, like the Foreign Secretary Liz Truss, and from outside the Cabinet Jeremy Hunt and Tom Tugendar, have gained, but there's now no clear leader ahead of the pack. It could give MPs another reason not to bring down their leader soon.
Up until recently, you had someone who was not the agreed successor, but was at least very plausible, who was physically and psychologically and attitudinally different from Boris Johnson. One is sort of economically expansionist, the others are more sort of traditional Tory. So you had an option. But now that option's been removed. There isn't an agreed successor with whom they can all feel easy.
The Prime Minister plans to respond to the 50 or so fixed penalty notices that have been delivered to Downing Street, including his own one, on Tuesday, when the Commons returns from its Easter break. He knows many MPs will want him back at the dispatch box the moment any more breaches of the law are identified by the police.
Well, before the news of Lord Wolfson's resignation broke, I spoke to Nigel Mills, who remains the only Conservative MP to go public with a call for Boris Johnson to resign since it became known that the Prime Minister had been fined for attending a lockdown gathering. I began by asking him why he thinks the Prime Minister must step down.
Because yesterday the police thought there was sufficient evidence to issue a fine for law breaking in Number 10, and the Prime Minister accepted that fine and paid it. We've never had a Prime Minister convicted of breaking the law in office before. Yesterday, he was fined and accepted it. I don't think it's possible for a Prime Minister to survive in office having broken the law.
The Prime Minister clearly disagrees with you. He has apologised. He says he has indeed paid the fine. That it did not occur to me that this might have been a breach of the rules. Why isn't that good enough for you?
Well, I mean, that may have been a good defence, that the police could have believed and not issued the fine, or the Prime Minister could have chosen to appeal the fine. But the simple fact is they didn't and he hasn't. Everyone appears to have accepted that wrongdoing took place. I think there's kind of a simple question is, can you have somebody in the highest office of the land being effectively convicted for not following the laws he put in place a few weeks ago, and he was exhorting the country most evenings on TV to obey to get us through a public health crisis?
I mean, the difficulty for you, I suppose, is you're out on your own on this, aren't you? You know, you've got cabinet ministers and MPs coming forward and saying he can remain in post, that there is no need for him to resign.
I hope people, as they come to reflect on this over the weekend, and this, I'm afraid, looks to be one of the more innocent of the events that are being investigated. So if there's fines for this, I dread to think what's coming for the parties that had alcohol and lasted longer. I mean, do we really want to try and sustain in office a Prime Minister getting multiple fines? I fear that's where we're going.
But I suppose I just wonder, you know, you're clearly very, very disappointed with the Prime Minister, but you also surely must be disappointed, I assume, I wonder whether you're even ashamed of your colleagues coming out and putting some of these defences. The Culture Secretary saying he was only at the party for 9 minutes. It's as if this doesn't matter for some of your colleagues. And I wonder how you feel about that.
Everyone's entitled to their view, and it's not an easy thing to come out and call your own party leader, your own boss, to quit, especially, you know, the country is facing multiple crises. So I can understand people coming to a different view. I guess I would just urge them just to sit back and think, you know, how can we justify to the country that made all those sacrifices that, you know, there were various occasions, and we now know at least one has met the sanction, the threshold for sanction, where the people setting these rules weren't following them.
There'll be many people who stand behind you in the country on that point, perhaps. But if you have almost every member of the cabinet who doesn't believe that point of principle is worth resigning over, I mean, who do you have in mind to replace Mr. Johnson?
Well, I've been a long supporter of Boris. I was hoping that he would be cleared by all this and could carry on in office. I've not been part of any plots against him. I'm not, you know, part of other leadership bids. So if we get to a leadership contest, I'll see who the contenders are and who I want to vote for.
If Boris Johnson won't resign, and he's saying he won't resign, the Chancellor, who's also been given a fine, doesn't resign, and ministers and fellow MPs continue to talk about, let's move on here, you know, it's not a resigning matter. Where does that leave you? How long do you stay in the party?
Well, I've elected as a Conservative MP because, you know, my constituents believe that was what was best for the country. So I make a case that I think the Prime Minister should resign here. If he doesn't, at some point the country will have to move on.
But what do you do? What do you do if you want to stand by this argument that the principle really matters?
Well, I just have to hope that people see sense of this and they realise it's not a sustainable position. I still think the Conservative Party is the best government the country can have. I'm a Conservative MP. I'm going to remain one.
Even if they continue to disregard what you say is a really, really critical point of principle. you stay anyway?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's politics, sadly, is about compromise on some things, isn't it?
Nigel Mills, thank you very much for talking to us today.